Hello and welcome to Rich Rides. As it's the end of the year and the last video I'm doing this year, I thought I'd do a sort of retrospective and a rewind of 2019. So the way I thought I'd do that, I've ridden a lot of different bikes, a lot of different types of bikes this year. So I thought I'd do my top 3 bikes of 2019 in my opinion, and of course of all the ones I've actually ridden. So number 3 on my list is the Suzuki Katana. So this bike, I think it looks great. I think it's a really bold move from Suzuki, where everyone else was producing like 1960s and 70s retro bike. They've made something that's a 1980s sort of retro bike, and it harks back to that original Katana, but really it's just a styling exercise. It's a very modern bike. I loved it. I found it super easy to ride, even though it's like 150 horsepower or thereabouts. Then yes, it's obviously quick, but the engine was superb, really smooth and torquey, handled brilliantly. I also think it'll be quite a rare bike. You don't see a lot of these about, so I think in future, then they'll become quite collectible. There's going to be a lot more GSXs out there than Katanas. So absolutely loved it. Any negatives with it? The one biggie, and I don't suppose it is such a huge thing, a bit like the fuel tank. The negative is it has a small fuel tank. When I rode it, it only had a range on a full tank, I think it was something like 120 miles, which it was a brand new bike. It was sort of the day after it had been released in the UK, so obviously this bike wasn't running. Hopefully that would improve over time in miles per gallon. But yeah, it's got a small tank. So number 2 on my list. This is the Triumph Speed Twin. So I was a big fan of the Street Twin beforehand. And the Speed Twin is like the Street Twin but on steroids. So again, it's got a very similar look, so it looks fantastic. Engine sounds superb. The whole engine is superb. It's the 1200 engine that they use in various other models, but I've ridden some of the other Triumphs with that same engine, but it works best in this actual bike, I think. As I say, absolutely flies. So it looks retro, but actually it's a really modern bike. It's got everything. So things like rider modes, obviously ABS traction control, all that kind of stuff. So even though it's got retro looks, it's a very modern bike, and it's real top notch as well. So everything is top quality. It's got sort of cartridge forks, Brembo brakes, everything is top quality. Absolutely love that bike. Any negatives with that one? One I had, it had a squeaky front brake, which a couple of other people commented on that particular video saying they'd experienced the same. So I don't know whether it's just something to do with those brakes, who knows. But yeah, that was the only sort of negative point that I found with it. But again, absolutely loved that bike. It's superb, and certainly my favourite Triumph that I've ridden this year. The one that I was really looking forward to riding was the Scrambler, the new sort of 1200 Scrambler. So again, same engine as the Speed Twin, but when it came down to it, I much preferred the Speed Twin, which was a surprise to me, because I really thought I was going to like the Scrambler. Scrambler was good, but yeah, for me, the pick of the range, all Triumph's range at the moment, is the Speed Twin. So, on to my number 1 bike of 2019. I'll come straight out with it. It's the Royal Enfield Interceptor. So, when I got hold of one, they'd literally just been released. The one I had 0 miles on it. The dealer had just got it in. I instantly felt at home on the bike. I thought it looked great. Again, a similar sort of retro look to the Speed Twin, but looks fantastic. It's got sort of piggyback shocks, all that kind of good stuff. It looks like a motorbike should, if that makes sense. The 650 engine is superb. It sounds great. got lots of torque, super smooth. A lot of people say it's a sort of back to basics bike because it's got nothing fancy like rider modes and those kind of things. But I think that actually makes it a more engaging experience. There's no sort of electronics interfering. I think it's got things like ABS, obviously, but apart from that, there's no interruptions between you. It's not a ride-by-wire throttle. It's a proper cable, which again I think in future will make maintaining it a lot easier. Bear in mind it's made in India, where they like to do things themselves and keep things running for years and years. I think it's fantastic. The whole bike is just great, and obviously one of the big things with it is just its cost. It's nearly half the cost of equivalent Triumphs out there, and I keep talking about Triumphs. Other vehicles are available, but yeah, it just does everything nicely. And it's the only bike I've ridden this year where I really didn't want to give it back, and I seriously considered buying one. I'm currently on this sort of year-long round the world trip, but if I hadn't been coming on that 2 months after I rode this bike, I'd have definitely bought one. That's how good it was. Since I rode that bike, like I say, when it was just released, all I've seen is positive stuff about it, and I think even MCN said it was their bike of the year as well. But yeah, I totally agree with that, and for that sort of cost, it's just brilliant. So I think they're 5,300, something like that, brand new on the road. So absolutely mad when other stuff seems to be sort of 9, 10, 11 and up to sort of 15, 17 grand some bikes now. So yeah, so that's my number one for this year. So I hope you liked this video. A bit of a different one to normal, but I thought it was good to just look back at 2019 and give my opinion. So please do like and subscribe, and see you again next week.